Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today we're going to go back to 1976, specifically New Year's Eve of 1976, as Elvis Presley and his entourage wrap up a modest five-city tour, closing out the year before a sold-out crowd at the Civic Arena in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This year also puts a bow on what was an incredibly busy year for Elvis Presley in 1976. Apart from his Vegas and Lake Tahoe residencies, Elvis embarked on 9 tours, performing over 190 shows. Now, by 1976, Elvis is in pretty rough shape. His condition has reached critical mass. And if things don't change, and change relatively quickly, sadly, the king of rock and roll has just about 7.5 months left on this planet. Now, having said that, the question I have in regards to 1976 and the workload that Elvis undertook that year is, where are the people in his life at this point in time who really cared about him? Where are the members of his inner circle? Where is his father? Where is his management when it comes to concern over his physical well-being? Now, I have always maintained that I believe that Tom Parker, Vernon Presley, and all of the members of Elvis's inner circle didn't necessarily have his best interest, at mind most of the time. Most of the time, they were more worried about themselves and how they were going to line their pockets and put bread in their bellies, even if it was at the disposal of what was actually, ironically, their meal ticket. Now, I have this fantasy about Elvis around this time. This is New Year's Eve. This is 1976. Like I mentioned before, if things don't change soon, Elvis only has about 7.5 months left on this planet. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, in my life, this isn't necessarily a conscious decision. This is just something that tends to happen to me every year around New Year's Eve. I get a little bit introspective. I take a little bit of inventory, not only on the year that I just went through, but just a general kind of inventory of where I'm at and where I'm going and how I'm doing. And, sometimes at the end of a year, if you're being honest and being impartial, you aren't necessarily happy with the way things are going. Other years, you think to yourself, hey, I made some progress. I'm becoming less of a scuzzbag in my life. So I have this fantasy that Elvis wakes up the day after this show here in Pittsburgh, New Year's Eve, 1976. And it's a new year, new you, that old chestnut, if you will. And he wakes up and he basically thinks to himself, you know what? I've had enough. It's time for me to make some serious changes. I'm dying here, man. I'm dying. But that being said, let's just sort of extend that fantasy out just a little bit for the sake of this conversation and say that, Elvis lives 1977 as he does up until about August 1st of 1977. Now, by August 1st of 1977, if things don't change now, just now, Elvis has just about 2 weeks left to live. Now, I assume, let's imagine that, towards the middle or end of July, of course, Elvis is home from his most recent tour. A tour that, although I think some of the shows on the tour turned out to be okay, a tour that, according to most Elvis fans who are being honest, there were a lot of shows that were sort of lackluster. Let's say that some point in the middle of July, Elvis meets with some CBS executives and producers. They come down from New York down to Memphis. They have these raw tapes of the CBS special, and they want to show Elvis what they have and maybe get some notes, give him some of their notes, kind of, chop it up over what they're thinking. about this possible television special. Do you imagine Elvis seeing the raw footage of himself? Now, I'm not talking about the musical performance, because I think I talked about this when I talked about the Elvis in Concert 1977 special, at least the album. The performance was actually very listenable. I don't think it was a bad show. I mean, there are a couple parts of the show that are very, heartbreaking, especially when Elvis does the monologue in the Are You Lonesome Tonight? I mean, to me, that is something that always just breaks my heart. Now, some Elvis fans will say, oh, he used to always do that. He used to sort of always play around with that monologue. He probably got bored of performing it. Now, I'm not disagreeing that he probably got bored performing it, but you go back and you listen to some of that, that part of the 77, live special record. It's heartbreaking. And to go back and watch the CBS special from 1977, I mean, in my opinion, that's something, especially after Elvis passes away in August, to me, that's something that really should have never seen the light of day, at least in my opinion. So let's imagine Elvis is sitting down with these executives, and they're showing him these tapes, and they're kind of giving him their thoughts on it, looking for some sort of feedback from him. Do you think Elvis sees those tapes and thinks to himself, yeah, man, that's pretty snug. I'm looking good. I don't know what you're talking about. I look good. I look alert. I'm in good shape. I don't know what you guys are talking about. Or do you think Elvis sees those videos or those tapes and is just completely blown away by the condition that he's in? I can't help, but think the latter. I mean, this was Elvis Presley. This was, as perfect a looking human being that was ever created on this planet. And you go back and you watch that 77, that concert video, the CBS special. I mean, he's a shell of himself, both physically and spiritually. You can tell there's almost like nothing behind his eyes. So I picture Elvis meeting with these executives, having this meeting, and maybe, putting on the brave face, maybe, flexing his bravado a little bit. But as he goes back upstairs, he's really in a state of introspection. He's just like, oh my God, I can't believe it's gotten to this point. I can't believe what I've become. I'm not even myself anymore. I'm just this thing. I'm just this, not even a human being. So he goes on for a couple more weeks living as if he did, or as he was. And he wakes up on August 1st, 1977. And like I said, if things don't change right now, he has about a little over 2 weeks left on this planet. And he wakes up, it's August 1st, 1977. He feels just like death. He can't get the image of that special out of his head. He's just tired. He's sick. And it hits him that he's dying. It just hits him. There's no denying it. There's no more getting past it. There's no more laughing about it. There's no more excuses. Suddenly, all of his denial just falls off of him, and he's standing there looking in the mirror, and he realizes, like, holy shit, like this is it. This is that moment. And he calls Joe Esposito, wherever Joe Esposito is at that particular moment in time, and says, hey, Joe, we're leaving in a half hour. I'm throwing some things in a bag, and we're getting out of here. And Joe says, where are we going? Where are we going? I don't even know what are you talking about? Where are we going, Elvis? He's like, I don't care where we're going. I don't care if we're going to Palm Springs. I don't care if we're going to Florida. I don't care if we're going to Vancouver, Vienna. It doesn't matter. I need to get out of here. I need to get help. I am dying. Joe, I'm dying. Don't you see that I'm dying? And of course, Joe Esposito, being the only member of the inner circle, I believe, that genuinely had any concern for Elvis, including his father Vernon. Joe Esposito is just in tears with joy, saying, yes, Elvis, I know, I've been seeing this. It's so frustrating. I can't believe we're doing this. Let's go. Anywhere you want to go. And Elvis and Joe Esposito fly off into the unknown. Nobody knows where they go. It doesn't matter where they go. Elvis has finally decided that he is going to go into treatment, and he's going to get the help that he needs, desperately needs, in order to save his life. Because at the end of the day, And again, we talked about this. I talked about this when it came to the 1974, Graceland live record recorded at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis. There are a lot of people that believe, I should say, that 1974 was a year that could have saved Elvis's life based on the offer he was given to perform in the film A Star Is Born with Barbra Streisand. And I don't disagree that Elvis would have made every attempt to clean himself up, get ready to be in that film. Anytime he had been challenged professionally or something excited him up to that point, he had always been able to sort of shake off whatever he was doing, get himself back into shape. And I don't doubt that he would have made an effort for that in 1974. Although I mentioned it on that video, I'll mention again, Elvis was suffering from a deadly disease, a disease that is progressive. And, a year and a half after the Aloha show, Elvis's condition had worsened. And I don't necessarily believe that he could have just shaken it off once again. I mean, the only thing that was going to save Elvis was himself at the end of the day. And I have this fantasy that on August 1st, 1977, Elvis wakes up. He realizes that he sees the people around him for what they are. Basically he fires Colonel Tom Parker. He fires his father. And anybody that's left from that old inner circle is immediately disposed of. Now, Vernon, we'll give you an allowance, all right? But I want you out of my house. I want you to go find your own place to live. You're out of here. And you're not going to have any more influence on anything I do, because you've always sided with Tom Parker, somebody who is, if they aren't consciously trying to kill me, they are at least subconsciously trying to kill me. So Elvis and Joe Esposito, they fly away. And they're gone. Elvis takes the rest of 1977 off and all of 1978 off. He's gone. Nobody knows where he is. Even people within the media are starting to wonder, what happened to Elvis Presley? He just disappeared. He's not at home. Nobody knows where he is. He basically fired everybody. His dad thinks he's not talking to him anymore, which he probably shouldn't anyway. And, beginning of 1979, Elvis returns home. Now, in my opinion, Elvis might even want to think about relocating from Graceland. I think one of the issues about Elvis that must have driven him crazy, Elvis was such a prisoner of his fame, but he couldn't even get away from it at home. I mean, you always see this footage of Elvis rolling in and out of the gates of Graceland, and there was always, 20, 30, 40, 50 fans, just loitering outside his house. If I'm Elvis, man, I'm moving. I don't even want to live in this house anymore. I don't want any part of who I used to be. Elvis comes home anyway. Let's say Elvis comes home. It's January of 1979. He is just in prime condition, physically, mentally, spiritually. I mean, he went through this, massive, invasive, aggressive treatment and therapy. I mean, this was not a tune-up, son. I mean, somebody dropped a brand new engine into this thing, but he comes home, he's revitalized, he's energized, he's excited about the future, and he spends the next 6 months, from January to June of 1979, reinventing himself, coming up with something new again. Now, this would have been the easiest thing in the world for Elvis to do. If he can beat his addiction, and if he can shed himself from all of the negative influence, all of those terrible people in his life, are you telling me that Elvis, in 6 months of being, engaged and clear and clean and excited, you're telling me he couldn't come up with something that would have changed the world again in the summer of 1979? I mean, come on. Elvis would have taken the world and been like, all right, you ready? Don't ever underestimate the king, because you're a damn fool if you do. And in the summer of 1979, Elvis does whatever he's going to do, which I can't even wrap my brain around because I don't have the genius that Elvis has. And the first thing he does is he takes it overseas, of course. He spends like the next 2 years touring the world. He's going to London and Rome and France and, China, Japan, South Africa, everywhere he's always wanted to go. He takes this show on the road for 2 years. Doesn't even come home back to the U.S. for 2 years. Are you telling me that in the summer of 1979, Elvis couldn't have, taken the world by storm again? I think you're wrong if you believe that. Well, sadly, on August 1st of 1977, Elvis woke up and continued living as he did. And as I mentioned before, sadly, he had less than 2 weeks left to live. And of course, he passed away on August 16th, 1977, making this show in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His last ever New Yinzer's Eve. This, though, I will say, having said all that, this is a very excellent show from New Year's Eve of 1976. Now, of course, we've talked about on this channel, whenever you talk about Elvis during 1975, 1976, or 1977 in particular, and so a little bit before that also, but in particular 1975, 76, and 77, when you talk about Elvis and you do it in a way that is unbiased and impartial, you have to acknowledge that there were a lot of sort of spotty shows over the years. Some shows that were downright shambles. But this show in 1976, New Year's Eve in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, this is evidence that when he was still on, even towards the end in 1976, when he was on, Elvis was still capable of giving his audience a world-class performance. I would argue that this show is as good as anything that you would have heard, 4 or 5 years prior. Now, obviously, this is a CD. You can't watch the show. I don't know what he's doing as far as his behavior on the stage. I mean, he looks, according to all accounts, this is an actual photograph from the show. He doesn't look, terrible. He certainly doesn't look as rough and bloated as he would get towards the, middle part of 1977. Now, this particular recording is an audience recording. This is a CD I picked up at Graceland many years ago. And, this is an audience recording. Now, of course, when it comes to the whole bootleg world, as anybody does, I guess, they probably prefer something that's maybe snagged off of the soundboard. But sometimes I actually kind of like these audience recordings. Now, a lot of times these aren't necessarily the greatest sounding records of all time because you're kind of, it sounds as if you're standing around a group of people and you can hear chit chat and you can hear people's, talking and all that. But I think that the quality of this record actually sounds as good as any sort of audience recording I've ever heard. And I got to tell you, like I said, normally I like the kind of soundboard stuff better when you can get your hands on it. But this record in particular is actually kind of fun because, like I said, when you listen to these audience recordings, sometimes you picture yourself, or at least I picture myself, at the show, and these are the people that you kind of overhear that I'm standing around. And the people at this show that you're standing around in particular are kind of a fun group of people, honestly. They're having a good time. You can hear some of their chit-chat. There's one woman in particular who I believe Elvis makes feel a little bit extra girly. I think it's safe to say that her panties have been dampened pretty much the second that Elvis walks out on stage. Like I said before, this was a show that was wrapping up a very sort of short, modest 5-city tour to close out 1976. Prior to this tour, Elvis had finished his last Vegas engagement of the year on December 12th. He was home between December 13th and December 26th, the day after Christmas, and then he went to Wichita Falls, Texas, on December 27th. He was in Dallas, Texas on the 28th, Birmingham, Alabama, a city that I love, on December 29th, and Atlanta on December 30th. Like I said, this show here, I think, is a very excellent show. I think that most Elvis fans who have heard the show agree that this New Year's Eve performance was very good. Like I said before, there are shows, especially around this era, part of Elvis's career, that get a little bit, scuzzy. And in particular, actually, the show right before this show, the show on December 30th, in Atlanta, Georgia, is a show that a lot of Elvis fans who have heard it acknowledge that it is not necessarily, Elvis at his best. Of course, this album features most of the usual guns when it comes to Elvis's band. And of course, it has the Sweet Inspirations, J.D. Sumner and the Stamps Quartet, Kathy Westmoreland, John Wilkinson and James Burton on guitars, hard-working Ronnie Tutt on the drums, bassist Jerry Schiff, piano by Sonny Brown, Charlie Hodge on Scarf Duty, and of course Joe Gershow and the Joe Gershow Orchestra. And like I said, as far as this particular recording goes, it is an audience recording. Like I said, I do think that being the case, I think that this record does sound pretty good. The picture on the back is kind of hard to see because I keep it in cellophane, but you get the idea. But I would say that the fans in Pittsburgh on New Year's Eve 1976, they were treated to what I would call about an hour and 40-minute, very excellent show. Like I said, this illustrates the fact that when he was still on, Elvis was capable of performing well. During this performance, he seems very clear. He seems coherent. He seems as if he is there in not only physically, but he's there in spirit. He seems to be having a good time. His banter with the crowd is pretty much upbeat the entire time. Of course, that was one of the big adventures of Elvis shows in the mid-'70s. Sometimes it wasn't even necessarily, when the songs would start, he was usually fine. It was usually kind of the weirdness in between songs when his banter would get a little bit weird. The analogy I've used for this, and I'm not comparing the two, but, I one time, a long time ago, went to go see Ozzy Osbourne live, and I saw, and I'm not the hugest Ozzy fan, but I went with one of my ex-girlfriends who was a huge Ozzy fan, and we went to go see him, and it was cool. I mean, to see the guy who sang the songs, at least for Black Sabbath, was worth the price of admission, at least as far as I was concerned. And, Ozzy's an icon. I'm not necessarily the biggest Ozzy fan in the world. But one of the things I specifically remember about that show was when, in between songs, when he would try and talk, man, it was an adventure. For one thing, you had no idea what he was saying. He still has a really thick British accent, which I think is cool, but he slurs so much that between the accent and the slurring, you can't understand anything he's saying. But once the songs would start, he sounded good. He was on time. And sometimes I feel like with these guys like this, like with Elvis, and when I saw Ozzy Osbourne, also when I saw Shane MacGowan from the Pogues, was kind of the same thing. The first time I saw Shane MacGowan from the Pogues, I mean, he was just annihilated on stage. He would try to make small talk, and you'd kind of have to like cringe a little at what he was doing. But as soon as the song started, he was right on time. His voice sounded good. And sometimes I feel like this stuff gets so programmed in these guys. Not saying it's effortless and not saying that they aren't, engaged, but it's something it becomes so natural. Now for this show, Elvis's banter and, his interaction with the crowd is very clear. It's very coherent. I think it comes across as if he's in a good mood, having a good time. Like I said, 1976 was an insanely busy year for Elvis in terms of the amount of work he did. But I think, starting these 5 shows, at least he had 2 weeks at home, after finishing his last Vegas run. And this was only a little 5-city tour. Now I say only as if it was easy for him to do. I'm not suggesting that. But I assume also that he is sort of rested and, not feeling as if he's obviously not closing out like a 20, one of those tours he did where it was 25 shows in 22 days. So it comes across like he's really energized. Of course, the record starts off with the typical Space Odyssey intro. I always want to say Space Oddity. I always have to catch myself because of my David Bowie fandom. But from there, he goes into CC Rider, and like I said, one of the fun things about listening to this record in particular, being that it is an audience recording, is, the crowd, and this crowd was just insane. The entire show. Now, you can hear the show really clearly on this record. Some of these audience recordings, it almost sounds like the artist is, way off in the distance. This one sounds pretty good. I'm not exactly sure where this person recording the show was standing. I assume it was relatively close because it does sound good. But it being an audience recording, you really get an energy of the crowd. And when he comes out on stage to start this show, before the song CC Rider starts, the crowd just erupts. And every time I listen to an Elvis record, in particular an Elvis record, because his crowds were so insane, like I've said this before, when it comes to, the Aloha show and the record, the crowd was so muted that it doesn't even sound like a live record. Now, at some point in time, I plan on discussing the global broadcast record in its entirety, because it is a very important piece of the history of Elvis. But to me, it almost feels like it's like a TV performance. It doesn't seem like a concert, whereas this, you listen to these Elvis shows, especially these sort of bootlegs that, I've got a bunch of them, you collect over the years. I mean, the crowd was just insane. It literally, this is a cliche, but it literally makes the hair on your arms stand up. This is a great version of CC Rider. He comes out right away. He just appears to have a lot of energy. He tends to have a lot of fun with the song. CC Rider is a song that I really love. An Elvis song throughout the 70s I really love. I mentioned before on this channel that, I like all of the eras of Elvis. I mean, everybody loves Rockabilly Elvis. I like a lot of the stuff he did in the 60s. I'm a huge fan of the films, within reason. Some of the movies are a little bit rough, if you want my honest opinion. And some of the soundtracks are, no cupcake either. But generally speaking, I like a lot of the stuff in the 60s, but I've always been such a huge fan of Elvis in the 70s. I think musically he was very interesting. Obviously, if you follow his life and his story, the 70s to me are the most interesting and, yes, tragic decade of his life. But CC Rider is one of those songs throughout the 70s that I always loved. He always seemed to perform it really well. After the song, Elvis jokes about all of the flash bulbs in his face. He said something like he just saw 10,000 flash bulbs. He was feeling temporarily blinded. On this particular recording, the people standing near whoever was recording the show in the audience, they all start chanting Happy Birthday to Elvis. Of course, on New Year's Eve, Elvis's birthday is just about a week away. The second song on this performance is I Got a Woman. This song has a really sort of like long intro. It's a little bit drawn out, but it's nothing that's overly painful. It's a good version of it. It's playful. Again, it's got good energy. At a certain point in time, the crowd really starts singing along with it. There's a point in this performance where Elvis gets a huge shot of feedback from the microphone, and he immediately blurts out, "Hey, what's the feedback?" Which is understandable. There's an interesting sort of interaction Elvis has with probably a female member of the audience up close, where she's apparently telling Elvis to shake his moneymaker. And Elvis sort of jokes back to her. He says, "Shake it? Baby, I just woke up. They just drugged me out of bed." And apparently then he does shake it, because then he says that he jokes that he's testing his suit to make sure that it doesn't fall apart. He also talks about how the suit could fall into a jigsaw puzzle, which I'm not exactly sure what that means. Of course, in 1975, I think it was actually New Year's Eve, 1975, Elvis famously blew the seat out of his pants in Detroit, so maybe that was what he was making reference to. The end of this song, they do the thing, and they usually do it on this song when J.D. Sumner does the sort of, the crazy, insane bass vocal gymnastics. To me, I've mentioned this before, the J.D. Sumner thing is something I don't necessarily get. Saying that you're the world's deepest bass singer is sort of like saying that you're the world's greatest pro golfer. I don't really care about either. So J.D. Sumner does the thing at the end of the song where he drops his voice as low as he can, and Elvis sort of jokes that he got a really mediocre response from the crowd, and that it wasn't the crowd's fault, it was J.D. Sumner's fault, and that he can even do it lower. And to me, this is where the song sort of drags out, because it's like, again, I get J.D. Sumner as being one of the backup singers for Elvis's band, but I've never been a huge fan of, when Elvis really puts the spotlight on J.D. Sumner. I talked about this, on the Graceland record. I don't really get it personally, and if you've ever listened to any of J.D. Sumner and the Stamps Quartet's records on their own, they are nothing nice. So eventually the song sort of mercifully comes to an end. After that is the song Big Boss Man. This is a song that, I don't know, Big Boss Man is a song that is okay. I don't necessarily love it. It isn't one of my favorite songs in Elvis's catalog. This particular version of it, the band is just like this jumble. I feel like there's just too much going on, and sometimes that's the issue, I think, especially when you're Elvis and you got a band of 30 people. Sometimes trying to find something for everybody to do, it just sort of turns into this kind of a stew, and that's sort of my critique on this version of Big Boss Man. It's a song that I don't necessarily love anyway. Elvis's performance, his vocal performance on this song is very solid, but to me, musically, it doesn't do anything for me. It's just kind of there. After that, he does a relatively abbreviated version of Love Me. I think that the version of Love Me on here is pretty good. I've always said this, sometimes when it comes to, the 50s songs and the 70s, sometimes to me the translation didn't always work. I actually don't mind the version of Love Me on this song. I, of course, love the original version of Love Me. After that, he goes into a song that I love. A song called Fairy Tale. Elvis describes this song as the story of his life before he sings it. This is one of my favorite songs that Elvis used to perform in the 70s. He talks about, you won't forget me when I go. Obviously, very prophetic. We are all sitting around here talking about Elvis, almost 50 years after his passing. You could make the argument that he is as big and relevant today as he ever was. Although somebody was telling me recently, this was their theory, this wasn't based on anything factual or anything they had read, I don't believe, but if somebody was telling me, this is somebody whose musical opinion I respect and trust, they told me that they felt that Elvis's star was finally starting to sort of dim a little bit, because a lot of kids nowadays don't have a lot of use for Elvis Presley. And, I don't have children of my own. I don't spend a lot of time around other people's children, or at least as little time as I possibly can. So I don't know that that's necessarily true. I guess I could sort of see it, but it seems to me, and maybe it's my age, maybe it's because of the people that I sort of interact with, but I feel like Elvis is as big today and as relevant today as he ever was. Now, like I said, I don't pretend to have my thumb on the pulse of youth culture when it comes to people like Taylor Swift and Billie Eilish and Post Malone. I couldn't possibly be any more disinterested. And if that's the type of music that young people flock towards, I couldn't possibly be any more disinterested. The next song after that is You Gave Me a Mountain. Man, another one of my favorite Elvis songs throughout the 1970s. There's a particular point in this performance of this song where he talks about this part of the song where he basically talks about divorce. And when he delivers the line, tired of being my wife, he delivers it in a way where he basically stops singing and he delivers the line, tired of being my wife, in a very quiet spoken word style, and it is incredibly powerful. I've always felt like after he and Priscilla divorced, that this song was really sort of directed at her. I mean, lyrically, it makes sense. I'm not exactly, taking a giant leap by saying that. But this particular, performance of it, when he delivers that line, I thought it was very powerful. I recently watched the Priscilla movie. This was something I was sort of putting off a little bit because I do get, as an Elvis fan, and I think we all do. I think all Elvis fans get protective of him. He doesn't need us to protect him, but I still feel very protective of Elvis when people make jokes, especially when people harvest low-hanging fruit, like the fat jokes and stuff. I get so burnt out on that crap, man. I get real protective of Elvis, so, and I'm not a big fan of Priscilla Presley. I don't know where a lot of Elvis fans come down on that topic, but I'm not a fan, man. I'm really not a fan of Priscilla Presley. I feel like basically she has lived off of him her entire life. Now, I get it. You divorced the guy. He was maybe not the best husband or the most faithful husband of all time. I understand that. And I'm not saying that. I'm not even, begrudging her for leaving Elvis when she did. But the way that she's kind of lived her life living off of him and sort of, always riding his coattails, I'm just not really a big fan of. Personally, now you don't have to agree with that. You may think I'm an idiot, which I'm not even going to argue that I'm not. But I did watch the Priscilla movie, sort of begrudgingly at first, and I will say that I thought it was done pretty well. It actually turned out much better than I thought it was. I thought it was going to be kind of a big hit piece, which it wasn't. I thought it was relatively fair and even-handed. I don't think it ever went below the belt. The one complaint I'm going to lodge is that I did not love the casting of Elvis in that movie. Now, obviously, if you go back and you watch the Elvis movie with Austin Butler, I mean, he basically changed the game as far as anybody who could ever play Elvis in a movie. So this guy, and I'm not even sure what the actor's name is. I kind of tried to remember it, but I don't remember. I'm not very good at remembering people's names, honestly. I thought he was adequate. Had this movie come out before the Elvis movie, maybe I would have thought it was better. I didn't love the guy that played him. I liked the actress who played Priscilla, and like I said, I thought the movie actually turned out to be pretty good. It was much better than I thought it was going to be. Like I said, I was a little bit cautious heading into it because, I understand that Elvis was not necessarily, always the easiest person to be around and deal with, and he certainly was no prize-winning husband, but I get really protective of him. I don't know why, it's just something that I always do. After that, he plays Jailhouse Rock, one of my favorite movies in the Elvis filmography, if you will. I like the song. I love the song Jailhouse Rock. The recorded version of it is one of my favorite songs from its era. Live, it's okay. It's something he just kind of, rushes through pretty quickly, as he does with a lot of the songs in the 1950s. After that, he goes into O Sole Mio, which of course leads into It's Now or Never. I really like this version of this song, apart from the fact that coming from the orchestra, there's just one trumpet in this particular performance. I don't know if it's out of tune or if it's like too close to a microphone or something, but it's just like this ear-shattering trumpet, and it keeps hitting this note that just kind of like, every time you hear it, it's like, and that's like, it's really distracting during this version of It's Now or Never. Apart from that, this version of the song is spot on. I mean, Elvis's voice is just like silk on this particular performance. Like I said, there's just this one trumpet. Every time it hits this one note, you can feel your eyes sort of spasm. After that is another one of my favorite songs, especially later in Elvis's career, although it becomes increasingly sad to me as you go later into Elvis's life, and that is My Way. There's something to me when I hear this song, especially when I hear Elvis sing this song later in his career, there's just something very heartbreaking about My Way. Because if you listen to the lyrics, you realize And, of course, like I said, we're at the end of 1976. I mean, things are dire for Elvis at this point in time. You realize that Elvis didn't really get a chance to do things his way. A lot of times he was a prisoner of his management. He was a prisoner of his father. He was a prisoner of the people that were in his inner circle, people that he trusted, people that he thought cared about them. People that I would argue, only saw, dollar signs and extravagant gifts when they hung out with him. He was somebody who was a prisoner of his fame. I think in my lifetime at least, and I can't speak on the whole, Taylor Swift thing, which is the flavor of the month, which I do think will pass eventually. I don't think that Taylor Swift's music is anything that people will be talking about more than a decade from now. But, Elvis was such a fan, such a prisoner of his own fame. And, in my lifetime, the only other person I can think of who was famous on that level where it really, ruined their lives was Michael Jackson. And, there's a lot of sort of, parallels between Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson if you look at their lives. Now, I am not, personally speaking, I am not a big fan of Michael Jackson's solo career. I'm not a fan of Thriller. I mean, say whatever you want. I don't like Thriller. I don't really like any of his, solo material, at least as far as I'm concerned. But I love Jackson 5. I love the Jackson 5. But in fact, there's that scene in the movie Elvis Meets Nixon. Now, that's actually, I want to talk about a pretty underrated Elvis movie. I mean, it's not cinematic gold or anything, but it's entertaining. The movie Elvis Meets Nixon. It's actually streaming on Tubi. I watch it all the time just because I'm a huge Elvis fan, and it is entertaining. The guy that plays Elvis actually does a pretty good job. But there's a scene in the movie where Elvis is riding in a cab through Washington, D.C., and the cab driver is listening to the Jackson 5. And Elvis is like, "What's that noise coming out of that radio?" And the cab driver explains to him, "It's the newest thing, man. It's my kids love this stuff. This is Motown, Dad." And Elvis makes the joke where he's like, "I'm afraid of what my daughter's going to be listening to." But, there's always been that parallel between, of course, the whole Lisa Marie thing with Michael Jackson was sort of unfortunate, in my opinion. But, Michael Jackson and Elvis, were such prisoners of their fame that you realize that Elvis wasn't really in control of really anything in his life. So when he sings a song like My Way, especially later on, at least for me, you realize that, man, he didn't really get a chance to do things his way. Everybody talks about he didn't get a chance to go to Europe. He didn't get a chance to, he didn't get a chance to tour globally. He didn't get a chance to pursue, a serious acting career. He was not really in control of anything. Now, this performance of it is incredible. Every time you hear Elvis sing My Way in the 70s, it is just like pucker your butthole material. After that, Elvis calls for the house lights to come up. And this is, you've seen me, now I'd like to see you. That's sort of Elvis's usual script when it comes to this part of the show. But he wishes the crowd a happy and prosperous new year. After that, he goes into Funny How Time Slips Away. A very solid version of the song. This is another one of Elvis's songs from the 70s that I absolutely love. After that, he introduces Vernon to the crowd. Now, again, this is all on CD, so you can't see what's happening, but I assume that the crowd can pretty easily see Vernon's scales underneath his tour windbreaker. After that, he goes into Blue Suede Shoes. This is a very okay version of this song. Very rushed. Whatever it takes to get through it. Maybe 50 seconds or something like this. I always, again, I've said this about these songs from the 50s and the 70s. They don't necessarily translate super well, but also by this point in time, you assume over 20 years, at least 20 years since a lot of these songs were recorded, Elvis is just done singing some of these songs. And, he understands that he has to do it. These are crowd pleasers. And what's interesting to think about that is, of course, Elvis passes away when he's 42 years old. A lot of these songs he's been doing for 20 years. But imagine today's standard, and somebody like, it always comes back to Morrissey. So I'll just say, imagine Elvis at Morrissey's age, 64 years old, out there still touring, doing what he's doing. Imagine how over Blue Suede Shoes Elvis would have been at the age of 64. If this is what it sounds like at 42, and again, I'm not going to judge the guy for not wanting to sing all these songs. I mean, Elvis had such a huge catalog of music, everything in the world basically to choose from, that going back and singing Blue Suede Shoes again probably wasn't the most exciting thing in the world. And the music world had changed 10 times over since Blue Suede Shoes was even like a relevant or quote unquote cool song. So you kind of wonder if Elvis was just like, God, these old songs they make me crazy trying to sing these and sound as if I'm even remotely interested. After that, the next song is Trying to Get to You. Vocally, a good performance. Again, very rushed, kind of through it. After that is Polk Salad Annie. This song just kills on this particular recording. Another one of Elvis's songs from the 70s I never get tired of. Every time I hear this song, this is one of those songs that just like gets stuck in your head. For me, and I'll be singing it for the rest of the day. If I hear Polk Salad Annie just one time. Great vocals, just incredible energy on this song. And I always love the sort of bass solo that Jerry Schiff does during the middle of this song. Anyway, that ends the first disc on this particular recording. Disc 2 starts off with, after some band introductions, they go into Early Morning Rain, which to me is, man, if this is not my favorite Elvis song of all time, it's definitely in my top 5. My favorite version of this song is the one that is on the Aloha from Hawaii Deluxe CD. That is my favorite version of this song. Probably one of my favorite Elvis songs of all time. I mean, Snowbird is right up there. If I Can Dream is probably my top 3 or 5 also. But this version of it kills. Every time I get a chance to hear a live version of Early Morning Rain, my ears perk up, because this is, like I said, this is one of my favorite songs of all time. After that, it goes into What I Say, very abbreviated, very sort of sloppy version of this. From that, it goes into Johnny Be Good, again, super abbreviated, very sloppy. You kind of get the feeling that even the band doesn't even want to be playing these songs anymore. From there, it goes into a drum solo by Ronnie Tutt, which is incredible. I'm not normally the big, solos guy when I go to shows. The style of music that I go see live, and apart from Elvis, a lot of the music that I'm a big fan of, soloing is sort of not really done very often. From there, it goes into a bass solo by Jerry Schiff that is just the jugs. To me, Jerry Schiff, I get that all of these players in Elvis's band, I think they're fairly well, celebrated. Of course, being Elvis Presley, you can hand-pick the greatest musicians in the world. I mean, these are not guys that you're buying off the rack at Walmart. These are the ultra-elite, flakiest crust musicians that there are. But of Elvis's band, I've always thought that Jerry Schiff was one of the most underappreciated. That's one of the things I've wondered too about the guys in Elvis's band. I'm not talking about this show specifically because this show is so good, but writing with Elvis throughout the mid 70s, being one of these guys who are just the ultra elite, musicians. I wonder what it was like on those nights when it was rough, when Elvis was off and he was, one of those shows that you read about, the shows that, the casual to non-fans joke about. I wonder what it was like, going through those performances, standing up there on stage, I don't know if you're necessarily being embarrassed by Elvis if you're one of these musicians, but there were shows, you go back and you listen to some shows, Elvis is gone. I mean, there's no lights on upstairs. This show's great, but I've always kind of wondered, what it was like for those guys on the off nights. After that, it goes into a piano solo, which is fine. I don't know why you need a piano solo, but it's fine. After that is man, one of my favorite songs from the 1970s. Actually, one of my favorite albums from the 1970s, Love Letters. Holy crap, I love the song Love Letters. This version of it is just the jugs. I love this song. This song is just snug as can be, at least in my opinion. This is a song that, man, you go back and you listen to a lot of the stuff throughout the 70s. I feel like this song gets left out a lot. I love the song Love Letters. I love that album. After that is the song School Days. Man, this song is just a mess. You can't make heads or tails of it. I get the feeling that, again, this is a CD, you can't see what's going on, but get the feeling that Elvis is, otherwise occupied, because even his vocals sound really muted. You can't really tell what's going on. I assume that he's interacting with the crowd during the song. It's just a big sloppy mess. After that is Fever. Holy crap, another song that I absolutely love. This version of it is almost perfect. His version, or his voice on this, sounds almost exactly like the record. And if you go back and you listen to this particular recording from Pittsburgh in 1976, as I mentioned before, this is an audience recording. And one of the fun parts about this record is, listening sort of out of kind of the side of your ear as to what the people sitting around Elvis are talking about, because in between songs you can hear them clear as day. And the woman, like I said earlier, there's a woman who becomes quite aroused, I will just put it bluntly, during this show. And during the song Fever, her arousal reaches almost like orgasmic proportions. She makes a couple of pretty crass jokes, which I won't necessarily repeat here for you. But you can pretty much imagine the things that she is willing to do to Elvis, if you can sort of put your imagination to it. After that is Hurt. Whew, man. I've said it before. I don't mind saying it again. This is one of my favorite songs from the 1970s. And, this is one of those... this is one of those songs, especially live with Elvis's voice. And again, Elvis may have lost a lot of things when it came to his live performance and maybe his physical appearance. Over the years, he certainly wasn't as mobile. He was a little bit out of shape. But his voice is one thing that always stood next to him. His voice was there with him to the bitter end. His voice was his ride or die. And when you go back and you listen to live versions of Hurt, man, those are vocal performances that will make your toenails fall out. And this is one of the best live versions of Hurt that I've ever heard. I mean, his voice on this song isn't even human. You can't help but wonder yourself, how is somebody born with this voice? It doesn't even seem real, at least as far as I'm concerned. Hurt is a song that I never get tired of. And this is actually one of my favorite live versions of the song I've ever heard. After that is a song called Hound Dog. Again, whenever he played Hound Dog in the 1970s, it was really rushed and abbreviated. Same could be said for this version of it. His voice sounds decent. It has decent energy. But, Hound Dog is one of my least favorite live songs throughout the 1970s because he basically just repeats the chorus maybe 20 times and that's it. After that, Elvis announces to the crowd that he's been on stage for 1 hour and 5 minutes. But he says that he's having a good time, and as long as the crowd is having a good time and as long as they want to hear songs, he's willing to stay all night dangerous proposition with Elvis fans, because I do believe they would actually have kept it. The show would probably still be going on right now if it were up to the fans in attendance that night. So dangerous proposition to offer. But I do think it illustrates the fact, or the point I made earlier, that I do believe that Elvis was in very good spirits and actually enjoying this show. So, I think he makes a point of it. After that is the song, Are You Lonesome Tonight? The woman standing next to you on the recording at this point in time, you get the feeling that she's like humping the chair in front of her, because she is just about ready to become impregnated by this version of this song. This is incredible. During the monologue, Elvis jokes that all the jokes in this, or all of the romantic, love-sick lyrics in the monologue this time are directed at Charlie Hodge, which actually it comes across as being very funny. I'm sure that Charlie Hodge was probably used to Elvis's, little quips like that. It's an incredible version of it. Like I said before, one of the things about the 1977 special, that at least they had the good taste to cut it out of the TV special, was if you go back and you listen to the Elvis in concert record, they leave the monologue in there where he just kind of has a meltdown. And to me, I find it to be incredibly depressing. Some other Elvis fans, like I said, have said, "Oh, he always did that. It was just a joke." I don't know about that. It didn't sound like a joke to me. But he definitely pulls off this version of Are You Lonesome Tonight great. And to me, when done well, that is an incredible song that I never get tired of. After that is Reconsider Baby. That's okay. This version is decent. It's not necessarily my favorite song of all time. From there, he goes on to Little Sister. Another song I like enough, not necessarily one of my favorite songs of all time. I think this version of it is really good. Elvis's voice sounds great. It sounds pretty much exactly like the recorded version, which, like I said, to me is, for me, as far as Elvis tunes go, it's like a middle of the pack. And then it's time to blow the roof off this MFer, if you know what I mean, because Elvis goes into the song Unchained Melody. Before the song, he dedicates the song to his dad, Lisa Marie, and his girlfriend at the time, Ginger Alden. Now, I've always maintained that, the Elvis's thing with Ginger Alden, wasn't necessarily that he was looking for love and, love and tenderness, and he was really in that state. I think, Ginger Alden was somebody that provided Elvis basically with what he needed. That was somebody who was willing to, be a codependent, an enabler, somebody who was willing to lay around in bed all day, sort of be a layabout. I never thought that, and I don't believe that Elvis really ever had, maybe he wasn't even capable at this point in time, having genuine feelings for Ginger Alden. Stacey Thompson, yes, absolutely. I believe that, that was somebody that he actually did genuinely care about. But when it came to Ginger Alden, I think Elvis basically knew what he was doing. He was basically sort of dumpster diving. And, I don't even know that he was capable of having those sort of feelings for anybody, because he was in such a, state of disrepair by that point in his life. I think that Ginger Alden provided him a service, basically by, being an enabler. But so he dedicates the song to Lisa Marie, his dad, and Ginger Alden. And sometimes, when you hear this song performed, you feel like that this song basically was written for Elvis. I mean, every time you hear this song live, he just absolutely slaughters it. I mean, to me, this is probably one of the best Elvis live songs, throughout the 1970s. And to me, whenever from the point of seeing the Elvis movie on now, regardless of your feelings about the the accuracy of the Elvis movie, the way that this song was portrayed in the Elvis movie is very powerful. And every time I watch the Elvis movie and that scene towards the end where he's playing Unchained Melody starts, I'm not going to lie to you, I get a little bit of a tear. It reminds me of when I was a kid. My mom used to be obsessed with the movie Terms of Endearment, and she used to watch it all the time. And at the very end of the movie, every time the end of the movie would hit this particular scene, my mom would just basically start gushing. And it was always surprising to me as a kid. I was like, how does she cry every time at the same point in the movie? Well, every time now I watch the Elvis movie, which is frequent, and there's that scene towards the end where he's on stage playing Unchained Melody, I basically just turn into a puddle. And my wife thinks that it is pretty pathetic, if she doesn't mind saying so. And I say, but look, it's Elvis. He's sad. He's not doing well. Look at him. Look how sad he is. But man, Unchained Melody to me is... Elvis singing Unchained Melody is just about as perfect piece of music as ever has been created. This version of it is just incredible. Like I said, this is one of those songs that no matter how many times I hear it, every time I hear it, different versions of it, it always sort of brings a tear to my eye. After that, he goes into Rags or Riches. He starts talking about this song, and somebody up close to the stage, he screams at him, just play the song! And Elvis basically says, don't tell me to play it. I'll play it when I'm ready to play it. Which gets a huge, reaction from the crowd. And then they go into the song Rags to Riches, which is a song that I like. Of course, this is a very, if you know the life of Elvis Presley, this is a very true to life song as far as Elvis's life is concerned. But, this version of it is pretty solid. I do like the song Rags to Riches. I like Elvis's version of it. I think after Unchained Melody, though, there's just it's like anything's kind of a letdown. After that, I always felt like Unchained Melody should have been the last song before Can't Help Falling in Love, which is where we're at now at this point in the show. Of course, the show closes out with I Can't Help Falling in Love. A great version of this song. It's funny, whenever you go back and you listen to these songs, these live concerts of Elvis throughout the 1970s, it became known that this was the closing song on every show. So it's funny, when you hear the beginning of this song, there's this kind of eruption of familiarity because people recognize the song. It's such a great song. But then there's this yelp of anguish because people also realize that the show is coming to an end. Which to me, if I were in an Elvis show, and somebody I never got a chance to see, I was only a year and a half old when Elvis purchased the farm, sadly. I know I would have felt the same way, because I love this song. But this is it, man. As soon as the song is over, Elvis is gone. He's in the car. He's out of the building before the band even finishes playing. I think it's a really good version of this song. Of course, after that, the band goes into the closing vamp, and the PA announcer announces that Elvis has left the building. But if you have not gone back and checked out this particular recording from New Year's Eve, 1976, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I would highly recommend it. This show is really of the highest quality, especially 1976 standards. I don't know that I've heard many other shows from 1976 that were better than this one. I've certainly heard a lot of shows from 1976 that were as good as this. I've also heard shows from 1976 that are sadly rather forgettable. But if you haven't gone back and spent New Year's Eve with Elvis in Pittsburgh 1976, I would highly recommend checking out this recording. Like I said, it's kind of fun to listen to it based on the fact that it is an audience recording, and the people sitting around you, if you listen to these things like I do, because I'm a nerd, you sort of picture these people being the people standing around you at an Elvis show. It actually turns out to be kind of fun. They're very likable. Like I said, there's one woman in particular who becomes quite aroused throughout the performance. It's somewhat distracting, but it's also actually quite fun to listen to at least as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Check back every week for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, talk to you then.